Welcome to the chat room. We got fun and games. We got all the memes you want, but you better come here today. We've got the posters that you'll find, whatever you may need. And if you've got your pepes, we got your disease. Welcome to the chat room. Welcome to the chat room. Won't you bring me to you? Memes. So I don't want to. I'm sorry that I started this stream so irreverently, considering the day it is. It is, after all, 9/11, which is a very important date, and of course, a very important day for the city that I live in, my adopted home of New York. It was on this day that Hillary Clinton puked, shit her pants, and fell into a SUV. And the world was never the same. The day of outdoor summer hoops. Man, that was a moment, wasn't it? When Hillary fell over. I watched that. We interviewed the guys who made the Pepe documentary, and I watched that segment where they talk about how this felt like they'd memed it into reality. And I gotta say, that's certainly how it felt at the moment. It felt like everyone. I know, of course, those freaks like to take things proprietarily because they suffer so much for being online, as in, you know, their lives are so miserable outside of it that they essentially deserve credit for creating all concepts because they spend the most time on here. But sorry, doesn't mean you're good at it. It just means your life sucks. Anyway, I really feel like that was a group project. Not even on our part, willingly. It's just the idea that she was wildly ill and hiding it was just very funny. And turns out, she probably wasn't even sick because, I mean, honestly, if you would you have asked yourself back then, 9/11, 2016, do you think Hillary will be alive in 2020? I think most people would be like, no. Unless they find her in a robot body, she's going to fucking conk out. But here she is. Because these people can't die. It's one of the many evocative, like, mythological elements of QAnon that, like, rings true. Why are these evil people essentially immortal? And adrenochrome stands in for the excess, the surplus value that they heap onto themselves. It allows them essentially to stave off death by the intervention of technology. And you know, it doesn't even necessarily mean you don't even necessarily have that much more than other people to live unnaturally longer than them, because you're not affected by the things that kill tons of Americans. Like, you have the time and money to avoid the costs of unhealthy eating habits or alcohol or anything else. You can offload those. You can pay to have them dealt with, instead of having the problem create more problem and bring you into an earlier grave. And of course, they don't expose themselves to the hazards of life that kill so many Americans. And they're never going to have to worry about having their lifespan shortened by excessive use of drugs, because they don't need drugs. Power is their drug. And adrenochrome, the idea that there's a chemical in brains that is emitted during fear and pain that can be consumed ritually and that will extend life, that speaks to the reality of life lived in the very sight of these people doing this while we're all suffering. Woodrow Wilson said that he was terrified of the automobile when it was introduced because he thought that the fact that now poor people would get to see rich people driving around in these vehicles would cause them all to spontaneously declare themselves Bolsheviks and overthrow capitalism. He was genuinely afraid that the ostentatiousness of this iron chariot whipping around and running over poor kids was going to make people so sharply aware of class distinctions that they would have overthrown capitalism. Now, we've seen that this country has particular bafflers built into it to withstand any overflow of radical activism. It's got so many bafflers and chambers and venting ports that it's been able to disarm popular misery no matter where or how much it emerges, basically since World War II. I got the sun in my eyes here. I gotta move. I know I look very oh fuck. This is what I do for you people. Man, I got this post here. Is the only thing that's stopping me from getting sun on my face. This is annoying. Hold on a minute. Yeah, I'm sure this is a lot of fun for everybody watching me do this. I might have to go back to the gross wall that everybody hates because there's no sun here. So sorry if it looks like I'm in. Sorry if it looks like I'm waiting to get executed with Nick Berg or something, but all right. Here we go. This ought to be all right. This is fine. You get to see the frickin' the what do they call those? Transmission boxes? I don't know. I don't understand math or engineering. Cable box? Transformer? I think it might be a transformer. Fuse box? Whatever it is, I don't know. It's some sort of technology that keeps me from dying of exposure. So was I even talking about 9/11 something? Oh, Hillary falling over. Yeah, that was really funny, wasn't it? She comes out wearing those glasses and goes, "I feel great." Never really got better than that. No, there was never a funnier day than that. Never a more unalloyedly funny day of this whole thing than that. It's funny now that the left has gone around to thinking 9/11 was an inside job, right? Because right after 9/11, 9/11 trutherism was a sole province of the radical left. That was it. Like Alex, and that's why seeing Alex Jones's trajectory is interesting, because he started off in the national consciousness anyway, after being an Austin goof up before that, on 9/11, and becoming a conduit for left-wing disillusionment with the status quo, channeled into the narrative of Bush doing 9/11. And then I feel like there was a pushback led by people like Matt Taibbi, where they say, who got called left gatekeepers, who they said, look, you're ignoring all the realities of power and the contours of power in this country to create a passion play about these evil Bush people, when the reality of American politics and geopolitics and geostrategic strategy is that things like 9/11 are the inevitable outgrowth of American policy and are then incorporated back into American foreign policy as an Ouroboros. It doesn't require intervention from the state. And now it feels like we're back to the smart opinion being that 9/11 was an inside job. Now, though, as an expression of like a deeper awareness of the absurdly, basically as a way to explain the failure of the left to generate anything. Like, there was no real left in 2001 in America. It had basically turned into nothing. Like you had, you know, people can point to something like the battle in Seattle, but I honestly think minus 9/11, that would have turned into a like a last gasp of something. It didn't really build to anything. It was like that anti-globalization movement, it reached the point of like highest conflict with the state, and then because there's no higher way to go, there was no higher level of conflict with the state that they were capable of or willing to carry out, it dissipated. And so 9/11 kind of like helped build like even a self-conscious left in this country, first around being anti-war, but then within that, there was the hardcore who used 9/11 as a narrative to like construct a story of American malevolence that explained the horror of this thing that had happened to us, saying, no, I know this is awful, and it should make you mad, but don't be mad at them. Be mad at the people in charge. And that was, in the context of the Bush administration, a left-wing position. The right pretty much loved Bush, especially right after 9/11. And in fact, for a while, 9/11 truth was used by people who wanted to, during the Obama years especially, who wanted to, both sides, stuff like birtherism, they would say, yeah, Republicans believe kooky stuff like that Obama wasn't born in America, but leftists believe that 9/11 was an inside job. And it was considered like a sine qua non for that like left's position. But it was left coming into its own. Now, the left has failed to achieve liftoff at a time of maximum crisis, a crisis that makes 9/11, that dwarfs 9/11, that is in the aftermath of 9/11, and that has like renders 9/11 in a day-to-day basis smaller and smaller in the minds of people who at one time had it consume their entire identity. And so an answer has to come to why hasn't the left succeeded? Why hasn't the left succeeded, considering how bad things have gotten? And if things getting bad don't make people act better, then what hope do we have? You know, that was what got us out of the Depression, essentially, without becoming a barbarous, a total fascist country, was the effort of people who experienced the Great Depression and wanted to take control of their economic destinies, and funneled that into things like sit-down strikes, wildcat strikes, massive labor organizing of the UAW and the CIO, the radical CIO, communist movement, the Communist Party, which was at its zenith of influence and membership, organizing and creating locus of radical power within every node of government, up to and including the Democratic Party. And now we're in a similar crisis, or the beginnings of one, and there's nothing even on the horizon of even the ghost of those ideas. And I think people have a desire to want to explain that. And I think the idea of inside jobbery, now of being persuasive as a thing that could happen hypothetically, a thing that could realistically happen in this country, like a cadre of people within the government carrying off a massive attack on its own citizens, staging elements of it, and in order to carry out this agenda in the Middle East. If you think it's possible to do that, then the failure of the left to make any kind of inroads makes sense. It's explained within the greater umbrella of that meta-explanation. Now, this is not me saying one way or the other whether I believe anything about 9/11. I don't really know. I'm agnostic about it, like I am with the Kennedy assassination. But I just think that the reason that I have noticed anyway, and people could say I'm wrong about this, I feel like there's been a kind of a shift towards more credulity towards trutherism than used to be considered on the left. And I think it's because it's not necessarily any evidence, because the evidence has always really been there. And I think some of it is very brow-raising and incredibly persuasive. Not stuff like Tower 7, that doesn't get me, but you know, the connections between Saudi Arabia and the hijackers, you know, stuff like that. And like the airline shorts, the fucking amount of money that was made by people shorting airline stock right before 9/11. But anyway, like I'm saying, it's an interesting case. There's stuff that's very eyebrow raising about all of it. We know that a lot of the stuff that they say is lies. Like they lied about, I mean, according to their own version of events, they lied for a long time about whether or not there'd been an order to shoot down Flight 93 or not, and whether Dick Cheney had issued it without any authorization from the president to do so. So, like that, we know they lied about shit, and obviously there's like the degree of Saudi Arabian government involvement is at the minimal funding by some elements within. Like how far it goes up, whether it was directed from the top of the Saudi family, royal family, that is not proven, but minimal, but much more likely to the point of handling as if they were intelligence assets. And when you consider the American relationship to Saudi Arabia in terms of creating radical Islamic terror groups in order to subvert the Soviets and also secular leftist movements inside the Middle East, it raises eyebrows, like I said. But I think what changes, what shifts over time, is what people are looking for. And I think for a while, people wanted to appear smart. They wanted to realize, no, I understand that this isn't about the Bushes. Like after Obama gets in there and just wrecks everything and just destroys any momentum that the left might have accumulated by hijacking it and then dispersing it to the winds. They're like, no, the system, it's bigger than Bush. And since it's bigger than Bush, he couldn't have been the guy who did 9/11. Like, he's just another errand boy for this systematic despoilation of the planet. But now, this farther into the shit, and now with another crisis looming, I think people need an explanation for, well, why, if we see this every day, why is nothing being done about it? Why are we not getting farther? Why are we not doing better? But like I said, I don't really spend a lot of time on that. I don't spend a lot of time on it because honestly, my assessment of the situation is not much different if it happened any way that people say or not. You know? I guess I do resist the idea that Bush was like, we're doing 9/11. I guess I always am resistant to that level of conspiracy conception. But I could definitely see, I could accept as plausible any number of things, from it being allowed to go forward after being discovered by the government, to government making another step towards like paving the way and allowing it to go at the operational level as part of a broader strategy. But it doesn't really change the way mustard tastes either way. We still know who our enemies are, and we still know what mechanisms they use to control and maintain this illusion of consent. So I don't know. I'm hesitant also to investigate it too much because I know I could definitely go down a rabbit hole. There's so many fascinating elements to that thing. I think wasn't there just recently declassified information that made explicit the degree to which there was high-level knowledge of the 9/11 plot in the Saudi government? Oh man, the anthrax attacks. That stuff will make you screw your head on the other way around. Anthrax sent right after 9/11 to major media figures and politicians with this weird block lettering saying, "We have anthrax, death to America, Allah," whatever. And it's discovered that the anthrax was 100% milled in a U.S. government biological weapons facility, specifically the one at Fort Detrick, Maryland, which is the headquarters of America's Chemical and Biological Warfare Division. It's the Unit 731 for the contemporary America. And they never fucking found who did it. They accused a number of people. One guy, they eventually kind of had to half admit that they'd pulled a Richard Jewell. But the other guy that they accused last, he kills himself, and then they essentially close the case. They go, well, this guy probably did it. But at the same time, you're like, okay, the U.S. government used U.S. government anthrax to make that looks like Muslims did it. Why would they do that? Exactly. I don't understand it. It doesn't even make sense at its own terms. They couldn't find some anthrax that couldn't be directly traced back to the U.S. government? They did paperclip Japanese scientists who conducted monstrous medical experiments, not on foreign Jews like in Europe, on American servicemen, on G.I. Joe, got brought to the United States and had their criminal records expunged in order to get the secrets of their tortures. But I have no idea about any of it. I try to spend more time thinking about the current situation. the current crisis, just because those are rabbit holes that, if you're doing a greater project, I think are worth investigating. Like if it's part of a greater project, but I know for me, I think it would end up me just burrowing farther away from legibility.
This is an interesting question. Has Chaco spoken on the connection between the CIA and modern art in the 50s and 60s? I don't think we've ever spoken about it directly on the show, but it is true that a lot of the stuff that we, the critical stew that like educated Americans swim in terms of like what is expected to be quality literature, quality art, like what are the qualities of art that we value. A lot of that was created by modern art schools in both painting and literature that were funded by the CIA with the express purpose of providing a aesthetic-focused alternative to the social realism of the Eastern Bloc, which was all about pointing out material conditions and inspiring the masses towards revolution and recognition of their class situation. Well, they don't want people thinking about their class situation and their art. No, thank you. Better to think about, like, the wistful travails and pains of a like impotent ad executive in a suburban Connecticut backyard, small domestic dramas that don't intersect with politics in any meaningful way. And then in art, abstraction, don't show me degradation. Don't show me like a Diego Rivera fucking mural that contrasts the decadence of the rich with the penury and misery of the poor. Show me a fucking bunch of shit on a wall. It could be anything. And then you tell me what it is. So that is true. Like the Iowa Writers Workshop was CIA funded. Partisan Review, a Paris Review, a lot of the organs of like middle and higher brow culture were funded by the CIA. And there were funds and grants for artists like Jackson Pollock, for the express purpose of creating an apolitical vocabulary for artistic worth. And the thing is, we still live with that. And it really is challenging to sometimes think, do I really value these elements of art because I think that there is some objective or even to me subjective quality to it, or am I just bowing to essentially deep state propaganda created to keep me from thinking critically and keeping me from thinking in a class conscious way? It's a very good question. Now that's why, like, you can say, like, when people say, oh, modern art, postmodern, whatever, that these things were created by the CIA. See, that's a different claim, and it's incorrect. These movements existed already. These movements would have existed. These movements were products of the reality. They were products of the material conditions. I mean, you're talking about post-war America. It's a land of plenty. It's a land of ennui, honestly, of a culture of is that all there is? Because we've reached the top of Maslow's hierarchy. We've reached the top of the pyramid. At least most of us who consume culture in any kind of way in America, the middle class post-war era. Of course we're going to make art that's self-interested and narcissistic and doesn't care about politics. Of course we're going to make that kind of art. It's just that the CIA encouraged intentionally and raised up the profile to places maybe it wouldn't have gotten. So that it reached a level of hegemonic understanding as rightness in the academy it might not have got otherwise. So it helped it over the line, but it didn't create it. And of course, at the same time the CIA was doing that, the CIA was also doing Operation Mockingbird, which was gaining literal influence over America's newspapers, America's media, direct provision, like through blackmail and through bribery and subornation, to turn reporters into agents of the state, putting out CIA propaganda for domestic consumption, like literal manufacturing consent, like not even through a propaganda model, or through just literally writing checks and presumably doing blackmail. Like a lot of the top political consultants and stuff back then, and guys, were highly blackmailable. There was a guy, I think his name was Drew Pearson, who was like the dean of the D.C. press corps, who was also gay and was heavily rumored to have been photographed either by the KGB or the CIA or both in flagrante delicto. And as a result, he was basically captured by intelligence. Same thing happened with other guys, and also others they paid. And then at the same time as that, they were doing MK Ultra, which is, so you've got these pursuits meant to create a mollified public perception, like a massaged and controlled perception for the public, both aesthetic in the PARALLAX, in the modernism stuff, like factual, like epistemological with the news media, and now literally psychologically with MK Ultra. Like they want to control. It was really a full spectrum attempt in the heady post-war days to control the human mind in every respect, control what the world it encountered conceptually, and controlled the actual chemical processes going on within it. And the degree to which they were successful is honestly one that we'll never know. Because think of it this way. All right, so we have a narrative that, yeah, all this stuff happened, but we found out about it in the 70s, the Church Committee and all that. And then, there were some flare-ups in the years since, like around Contra and stuff. But for the most part, the CIA's power has diminished. They're sort of like the mafia, which is very similar, very fitting since they do the same function as the mafia, and they cooperate with the mafia on a lot of stuff, including the Kennedy assassination. But they're on a decline. Their influence is waning. Like now they're just a bunch of schmucks who can't stop 9/11 or predict that the Berlin Wall is going to fall. But isn't that what we would think of it if all those things had been successful? If all those experiments had been successful and they really were able to create some sort of broad spectrum propaganda model that combines airwaves and literal chemical brain conditioning to essentially massage the human mind, massage the will of the people towards tractable ends, keep guardrails basically. Wouldn't we remember that as being like, oh yeah, and then they just went away, instead of, oh yeah, they took over everything? No, we wouldn't know that. That would defeat the whole purpose. If they needed to do that, if they didn't have to do this stuff to our brain, then they would live in a world where they could just be out and say, yeah, we control you. But they can't do that. So they have to do, what they would do is they would make us think that they went away while actually controlling everything. I'm not saying that's true. In fact, I think it probably isn't. But the disturbing thing for me is it seems like the world we live in and the degree of manipulation that is just carried out in full view of everyone, never changing anything, makes me feel like there is some mechanisms that actually worked. Some combination of persuasion and perception massaging and chemical rearrangement. I don't know. This is some 420 shit. This is a very 420 stream. I'm going to put this one on YouTube. I'm not going to put all these on YouTube. I'm only going to put the ones I think are decent. But yeah, this is definitely feeling very 420. I'm feeling very paranoid. What if 9/11 never happened? Wow. That's a real one, isn't it? Because that is such a contingent act. A lot of times that could have been stopped. I don't know. I've always been a skeptic of 9/11 trutherism, but since Epstein, I've kind of widened my credulity meter. And I still have a fundamental problem with the whole idea of an inside job 9/11, and that is that the government apparatus that had that degree of control over an operation that size, I don't think would have to do it to get a war in the Middle East. But maybe they did maybe the Rand Corporation did a bunch of regressions and they realized, no, the only guaranteed way to get this to happen is with this. Nothing else will work with like anything less than like a 25% failure rate. Who knows? I don't know. But the main thing is, if it happened one way or the other, doesn't matter. Same people are in charge. The way to dislodge them is the same. It's just really their capacity to control things that's different. And honestly, I don't know how you can embrace the real, like, hard truth theory. I mean, stuff about, like, them knowing beforehand, that's a whole different question. And I think that's really significant. Like, there's all this weird stuff about insider trading happening right before 9/11, like stock, the shorting of airline stocks. Guys got arrested for, like, doing insider trading off 9/11 information. So the idea that it was known about at some level and was allowed to happen, I can buy that. But like controlled demolition and all that shit, it just seems like you're working backward. But I'd say either way, they're still in charge. Same people, they have the same motives, and the way to beat them is sadly the same: organizing. And god damn it, that's the hard part. Because all the other theorizing is a lot more fun. Talking about like who blew up the towers is way more fun. They're trying to like push the goddamn wheel of pain up the hill again. Oh boy. See, the funny thing about Tower 7 I never got was, why would you need to blow it up? And the only answer anyone's ever given me is like it had the files or something. It's like they knew what they had the whole like months leading up to it to plan everything, which means they could have planned to remove the stuff from the place before they did it. Unless they forgot and then had to like fire a missile at it to just knock it down. I don't understand. And then yeah. And another thing about the Pentagon is like, that seems like such a bad target, you know, since it's, I mean, you go to the trouble of knocking down the Twin Towers for their propaganda value, why just crash into the thickest building on Earth that's going to barely show any scars? And it's like, well, because the part that got blown up is like the accounting department. That's like, isn't there another way to presumably they know where this stuff is and they can get it and like get it out of there. If they could plan that, I don't know. It's all, like I said, I am agnostic on all this stuff. Having an opinion is nice, but at the end of the day, it doesn't prove anything. And there's no way to know, so who gives a shit? I'm just going to be grilling back here in my little grill spot. Catch me grilling, boys and girls. I'm all about that grill life. You feel me? I know you could. All right, guys. I'm going. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Oh, somebody asked me yesterday to talk about the fact that now we have the name of a guy from the actual name of one of the guys from the Saudi embassy who helped the 9/11 hijackers navigate in the U.S. and give them money and stuff. I mean, it's just they forget to block out a name. We knew there was a guy, there was a direct part of the Saudi government who was involved. We've always known that. That's the hilarious shit. Is that it all just went out right in the open. And because it's one of those things that's so vast it can't be dealt with, it can kind of go out there because there's no one who's going to do anything with it because it's too all-encompassing. Same thing with Epstein, kind of. You don't really have to worry about one side or the other using it if it's out in the open because it's too all-encompassing and it's too bipartisan in its condemnation. So, and it's too central to the perpetuation of the existing systems that both sides support. So there's no way for them to effectively leverage it. So we can just sort of like over time let this shit out because there's nothing anyone can do about it. I mean, I remember the fucking Afghan tapes, the Afghan papers, which were like the Afghanistan war version of the Pentagon Papers, saying basically the same thing, that they lied the entire time about the Afghanistan war. They lied about the metrics. They lied about America's progress. They lied about the viability of the government. They lied about the viability of the Taliban opposition. They lied about everything for the entire way that they did, and it didn't matter. because no one's going to change any of this shit. So then what? So who is there to even make anything of it other than individual citizens? That they can see everyone else not doing anything about it and internalize the idea that even though this thing seems huge, it must mean nothing, because if it did mean something, why isn't anybody doing anything? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised with those JFK files. I wouldn't be surprised. At a certain point, it'll be so long ago, and memories will be so short, and there'll be very little remaining emotional attachment to the 60s. Basically, once the boomers are gone, the ones who still fixate on the Kennedy assassination, as soon as they're gone, or most of them, or they're out of positions where they're still exercising authority through the vote in any significant number, you can put it out there, and then people will just be like, oh, wow, huh, wow, well, you look at that. And they'll look around, and nobody's going to do anything, so, okay, I guess that's just a thing. Yeah, it does feel like we're just getting this series of limited hangouts, all designed to inure us to the vast amount of shit that's been kept from us, with the implicit message that there's nothing you can do to stop us, which is really why I resist conspiracy theory shit more than anything, because it's very hard not to take the message of conspiracy theory worldview to be there can be no change, because their control is total.
Because that's a hell of a trajectory. You guys ever wonder how much more advanced we'd be culturally and socially and civilizationally if we had embraced Crystal Pepsi? Because Crystal Pepsi was mind-blowing. Crystal Pepsi told you, hey, you know that perception you had your whole life? You know how you always thought that cola was brown? That's the color of cola. What if I told you it didn't have to be? Here, drink this. I don't understand. This looks like a Sprite of some kind. Some sort of lemon lime beverage. No. It tastes like a damn Pepsi. If Pepsi is not brown, then what is it? What is anything? Maybe we would have been more open-minded as the end of history turned into the charnel house of the 21st century. Maybe we would have been able to think outside the box. Maybe after 9/11 we could have thought, hey, if Pepsi isn't necessarily clear, then this terrorist attack is not necessarily the beginning of some civilizational war, unless we make it. Let's not do that. I have no proof of this. I just wonder sometimes. Although apparently the failure of Crystal Pepsi was partially due to rat fucking by Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, after Crystal Pepsi set the world on fire with its mind-blowing commercial debut after the Super Bowl, using Van Halen's Right Now as its theme song. Immediately after that, Coke came out with their own crystal version of Coke. Only it was Diet Tab, but they said Crystal Coke. And so it tasted like crap. It tasted bad. It was a diet beverage. And not even like their good diet beverage, their crummier diet beverage. And so because Coke is so hegemonic, and because people don't really differentiate that finely, somebody has a bad tasting Crystal Cola, and now they don't like Crystal Cola. Fucking Coca-Cola Company. Kept our brains in the box. Kept us part of the mind control, part of the MK Ultra mind control. Making sure that consciousness expanding concepts like Crystal Pepsi aren't allowed into the marketplace. Now No, I don't think that would have happened, but it's funny to think about. I mean, and that goes to show that I honestly think there's something to the old argument that Coca-Cola made new Coke on purpose, made it bad on purpose, and made a backlash on purpose, so that when they brought it back and said, this is the old Coke, not only did people all want to drink it out of gratitude to have it be back, they wouldn't notice that in the interim they switched out the fucking sugar for high fructose corn syrup. Diabolical. Diabolical. Between all that and hiring death squads to kill union organizers, pretty much a bad company. Somebody's asking if I've read Behold the Pale Horse. Behold the Pale Horse is a book by Milton William Cooper that is a conspiracy favorite. It's essentially a unified field theory for all UFO conspiracies, secret societies. It's got everything you need. The Soviets and the Americans meeting in a submarine under the Antarctic, but I haven't read the whole thing because it's not. The prose isn't scintillating, but I know the main arcs of it as a conspiracy, as a deeply stewed conspiracy fan. I'm aware of the arcs. I'll admit I generally don't read a lot of the classic texts themselves because most of those guys don't really know how to write, and they love repeating themselves and larding things with purple prose. Just give me the bullet points. That's why I want to throw this out there for anybody who likes conspiracies. One of my favorite documents in conspiracy lore is the skeleton key to the gemstone file. This is a thing that I found on Web 1.0 when I was in high school. I printed it off and read it during lunch, and it's this amazing layout of like 20th century history through the lens. It's like a James Ellroy history of the 20th century, where Aristotle Onassis is like the kingpin of all world crime. He's like fucking Fu Manchu. And he, of course, assassinates the president, Kennedy, but assassinates a million other people in pursuit of global organized crime racketeering profits. And also kidnaps and replaces with a double Howard Hughes. But the thing I like about it is it's bullet points. It's this date, this thing happened. Like a telex. Very Elroy also. I read it right around the time I read American Tabloid, and man, that was peanut butter and jelly. So, love the skeleton key to the gemstone file. But just one more thing about Cooper. So yeah, Behold the Pale Horse is conspiracy, a classic seminal conspiracy text. A lot of people have read it. Not terribly rigorous, but the thing I think is funny about him most of all, though, is that less than a week after 9/11, he was confronted by like U.S. Marshals or something over like his refusal to pay taxes, and he got in a huge shootout with them on his front porch, and he shot one of them in the face, I think, and he got lit up and killed. That happened less than a week after 9/11. I just imagine somebody who was a big fan of his finding that out and just being like, what? And then, of course, Hangin with refers to the Mark Curry sitcom from the 90s, Hangin with Mr. Cooper. I put the guy's full name in there as a classic bit of pun-based synergy, which I like to do with the titles for some of these. Like a little make 'em up. We like to have fun here at the Twitch stream of Chapo FYM. Someone wants to have an explanation for the Tsarnaev FBI thing that Felix mentioned. So Dzhokhar had his death sentence overturned on appeal today. And Felix pointed out that we'll probably never find out the truth about the Boston bombing, which most likely at some point involved the fact that that Tamerlane, the older brother who died during the shootout, got run over by his brother, was in all likelihood some sort of CIA asset, either a informant or someone who was like being run in some way or another by the agency. And the evidence for that is obviously circumstantial but significant. One of the main pieces of evidence is that a year before the Boston bombing, 3 people were found dead, including Dzhokhar's best friend in a gym where he had worked out, covered in like drugs. The local police, their investigation was almost immediately taken over by the FBI, who, according to their own statements, never interviewed Tamerlane, even though he was the best friend of one of the victims. And no one was ever charged for a triple murder that the FBI was supposed to investigate for a year. And then, of course, there's the fact that there's a bunch of weird shit with Tamerlane and the timeline. There's the fact that he went to Dagestan, went to the Caucasus, and met with like jihad leaders. And the FSB actually informed the U.S. government and said, hey, this guy's been in areas with terrorist activity, meeting with people that are suspicious. And it was never followed up upon officially. Also, you have the fact that the FBI does not even claim that the Tsarnaevs made the bombs. They stipulate that someone else made the bombs, but they have never said who it is. And there's never been anyone charged with having built the bombs. And then there's the fact that a Tamerlane associate, a Tsarnaev associate, was being interrogated by the FBI in Florida, and out of nowhere grabbed a broom or something, according to the agent, who then shot him in the back. And then that guy's wife was immediately deported. Very, very, very eye-raising shit. And of course, you know, there's the Alex Jones thing, and a lot of people who think that means that the Boston bombing was a false flag. I'm always very skeptical of the whole false flag thing, just because I don't think it's necessary. But the FBI does. One thing we know the FBI does is set up people for fake entrapment terror attacks so that they can pad their stats. Basically, every domestic terrorism plot that's been thwarted by the FBI since 9/11 has been a case of pretty blatant entrapment. There's almost no instances of the FBI, like the way you would imagine it in a movie, finding out about some cell and then catching them before they can like buy a bomb or something. It's almost always some sleazebag the FBI pays going to find unstable people and say, hey, wouldn't it be cool to do terrorism? Until they say yes, and then they bust them. The most infamous example is of some Miami Haitians who got entrapped into trying to buy like a missile to blow up the Sears Tower. And all of it was orchestrated by an FBI informant. None of it would have come anywhere. It wouldn't have ever come to anything, because it wasn't anything without the FBI explicitly building it up. And that's true of almost every terror prosecution since 9/11. Which means it's pretty easy to imagine Tamerlane being one of those guys. They got on the line, and then at some point he got off the line, and then they had to cover that up. I don't know that's what happened, but that to me seems like it's the most likely scenario. It sure as shit wasn't anything like in fucking Patriots Day, the absolute propaganda. What is the point of the stat padding? It's so that the FBI can appear to be doing something. Like, I mean, we reoriented our entire domestic security around stopping terrorism after 9/11. And there was no terrorism to stop. And if there's no terrorism to stop, then why are we doing what we're doing? But if there's some guys going to blow up the Sears Tower, and there's some guys who are going to attack Fort Dix or something, then there's a reason that we have to be fighting this war. One thing you have to realize is that the FBI, before 9/11, they did a lot of stuff. They had a wide remit to investigate federal crimes of all types: financial, political corruption. And after 9/11, it essentially all went to terrorism. What's the message if they don't find any? What's the message if, yeah, we put our most we put our biggest and most effective federal police investigative agency on the case of terrorism. And it's like, yeah, no, nobody's doing anything. What the fuck are we doing in Iraq? What are we doing in Afghanistan? Why are we droning people? Come on. Not anymore, thank God. Instead, I'd like to talk a little about something called the Iraq War that a few of you might remember. Some of you probably don't even remember it, or at least the beginning of it. But us old heads remember. And I've, of course, been listening to Blowback by the traitor Brendan and Noah Colwyn, the podcast about the Iraq War. And it's been great going back and remembering all our old favorites from the Bush White House, all the lovable oafs who failed to stand against them. They actually reminded me of something that I had forgotten, or I guess my brain had rearranged. I had always remembered the incredibly douche-chill moment of the 2004 Democratic National Convention when John Kerry came out and saluted the audience and said, "John Kerry reporting for duty." And by listening to the show where they played that clip again, I realized I'd remember that wrong, and that he actually says, "My name's John Kerry and I'm reporting for duty." And that's so much worse. Like, more words, just, he sounds like a fucking nerd, or like he's at AA or something. Anyway, listening to Blowback has made me been thinking about the Iraq War and how, even after all these years, I don't think that there's a coherent, fully agreed upon theory on any part of the mainstream, or even on the left really, about why the hell that war happened. Like, what was, because it was such a clear case of a choice, a war of choice, right? Like, talk about how the presidency is much more constrained than we think of it as, and that the choices presidents get to make are through a very narrow aperture, because so many choices have been taken off the table by the reality that they're merely managing a global empire, essentially, and that the inputs of that system are what determine most of the things that are theoretically and in our minds imagined to be part of the remit of a president, but in reality are out of their hands. So they end up doing kind of what the consensus is best interest for monopoly capital, or would-be monopoly capital. But there is so much that seemed dicey and unnecessary about the war in Iraq that it really makes you scratch your head, because obviously it wasn't for any of the reasons they claimed. I mean, duh. But also, even the vulgar leftist material critique that it was about oil doesn't really make sense. If we really wanted the oil, if it was the oil we wanted, we could have made a deal with Saddam. I mean, my God, the one thing we knew about Saddam is that he was somebody we could make a deal with. And honestly, I had wished during the war, it wouldn't have made a difference, but I wished during the run-up to the war, more people had pointed out, you know how I know that none of this is a big deal and that you guys are making something up, and that I don't even have to argue about whether or not there were aluminum tubes, or if there's whatever the fuck, whatever bullshit Colin Powell is talking about. The reason I know that I don't have to worry about Saddam Hussein trying to destroy my way of life with chemical or nuclear weapons is because he lives in a big gold mansion, and he has kids who drive around in Ferraris. He likes being alive, and there's no way he could realistically wield any of the powers that we were claiming he was seeking in a way that wouldn't have destroyed him. And we know he was a guy we could make deals with because we'd made deals with him for most of his career. We handed him a list of communists to execute in the 70s, and we helped him fight Iraq. We basically gave him the idea that if he invaded Kuwait, we wouldn't do anything about it. We set him up so that we could have a good PR victory. And then we just decided to keep him as this punching bag. But he could have been brought back into the tent. And the oil is fungible anyway. Oil is something that is sold on an open market. You can't really claim it the way that people like Trump, for example, think you can, where we go and we get the oil. Why did we get the oil? We bombed the oil and then we get the oil. Like, you could take it out of the country or something. And then even then, who is selling it? To whom? It's all, that's what baby brains think that oil politics work. So if you want to get oil if you want to get access to Iraqi oil, even profit, if not, the profits of private companies, because they did not end up taking over the Iraqi oil. Iraqi oil is still controlled by the Iraqi government. I mean, there's concessions to be had there, but they did not. It was not a bonanza for private oil companies the way they claimed it is. But there's still money to be made as moving it across the country and facilitating the trade. So there was deals to be made with Saddam, even if you wanted the oil. And I think the real only way to answer that question about why we went into Iraq and why that specific group of people, the neocons who got in there around Bush, pushed that agenda so specifically in the face of the majority of like the institutional bureaucratic knowledge base inside the government and the military and the State Department and stuff. They weren't doing a radical break, and you can wonder, well, why the hell did they go to Iraq? Of all the things they could have done, why did they go to Iraq? And I think it boils down to the fact that the U.S. was seeking, subconsciously and consciously, at the level of policy and the aftermath of the end of the Cold War, a new ideological structure to justify the maintenance of the military Keynesian economy. One of the big generators of capital accumulation in the United States after World War II was a massive investment in defense. The military-industrial complex, as Eisenhower warned us about. Like, there's ways that you can, operate a Keynesian economy. The British, as they offloaded their empire to us, and no longer had this justification of wielding military power throughout the world, their Keynesian post-war era was building the things like the NHS and public housing. Like, public housing is vastly, vastly, vastly more common in the UK than it is here, because there was much, much more direct state housing built in that post-war period. We made bombs. We made tanks. And the thing about those things is they got to get used. And obviously there was a strategic and tactical reason during the Cold War to maintain that kind of thing, and that was accepted within the public. Like, that was a reason that held ideological sway. After the Cold War, the U.S. is not going to abandon military Keynesianism. It's not going to abandon its military posture, its first in the world position, because that would mean reducing America's power from being the unipolar power in this new arrangement to being part of a multipolar world. A mutual drawdown among everybody and a redistribution of power horizontally across nations. And part of that would be a significant reduction in American military. And that is something that is theoretically possible, that could have been done, in my opinion, but would have required political will to do so, that was antithetical to the powers that the powers that were, rather, and continue to be in the United States, in terms of its ruling class structure and the bureaucratic conventional wisdom that became like sedimentary layered within institutions like the media and the state bureaucracy. And so the 90s were this frantic search for a modus vivendi here, a reason. How can we reestablish America's hegemonic military position in the absence of an enemy? And with people clamoring for more spending at home on, hey, you know how we never really got a welfare state because instead we built this world-spanning military power? Now we don't need the world-spanning military power. Maybe we can go ahead and build that social democracy now. But of course, as it was understood at the top levels of power, to give up the military position would be to give up America's dominant posture in the world economic order, which would, in their mind, inevitably lead to America becoming weaker, less powerful, and economically bereft. Now, of course, the economical breftness thing is a joke, because our position in the world economy has intentionally left our economy fucking entirely hollowed out and replaced with this hodgepodge of gig economy, service industry jobs and everything predicated on massive spending through credit. So it's not like that is working out too great for the average American now, but of course, at the top level of planning, it is considered better than a multipolar world where maybe we have to give up creature comforts, but also maybe we take all that social democratic stuff seriously in the absence of this fake conflict, and that like redirection of resources and control of society and the workplace downward. Maybe that reinvigorates a civic culture that that can accommodate not being the prominent dog, the number one dog in the pack, being part of a multipolar world that sees a mutual drawdown. But none of these things are possible because they would eliminate this ruling class. So of course that's not going to happen. That's not on the agenda, and nobody who would want it is anywhere near the levers of power. Instead, you have a bunch of guys who need a new justification for a military economy, and also at the same time a need to establish a new military order in the world where the U.S. military maintains its position as the primary force of global law enforcement. Essentially, I mean, world police is exactly what we are. I mean, we're the world police of the global economic marketplace. That's what we're the mall cops. That's the job. And without the Soviets, and with competition from China and stuff, and Russia turning away from our orbit after Yeltsin gave way to Putin, there's a real need to reestablish America's military dominance. And if that's the question, it's just a question waiting for it's an answer. It's a question that now is waiting for an answer in the form of what's that going to take? And then 9/11 happened, and I think one of the reasons I think a lot of people instinctively believe that there's a intuitive truth to birth or to trutherism is just how much 9/11 was able to reorder the American political scheme in such a way to essentially give them carte blanche to create this new structure. So I don't know. I'm agnostic. I don't really think it was Bush, but I don't know. I mean, it's certainly, in my opinion, wildly plausible that intelligence about 9/11 and the planning of 9/11 was intentionally ignored. Because, hey, if this happens, it's not like it's going to be bad for us. That's possible. But once again, I don't really try to look too much into that madness rune, because I know that way lies insanity. But anyway, one way or another, they get this thing fall into their lap, or they bring it to their lap. Either way, it creates a new structure where America now instinctively has re-embraced its martial virtues, because now there's a new global war to be fought. And of course, you've talked about it. If we really wanted to prevent another 9/11 and reduce the threat of terrorism, we would have treated it like a law enforcement activity. We would have negotiated with the Taliban for the overthrow of bin Laden, which they were willing to do. They were absolutely willing to do it. We essentially turned down any serious offer from the Taliban because we needed to make something go boom. Because when something that horrifying happens and that destructive to the social fabric and people's understanding of what could happen in the country they lived in, because Americans were the most cosseted baby country on earth, where that kind of thing essentially never happened on the mainland, and so it was literally inconceivable for people, and they needed a way to understand that. And so if that anger and that confusion and that pressure, if it didn't go out, it was going to go up. And so they had to do a military response. Anyone would have. Gore would have also turned down the Taliban and gone to war in Afghanistan, even though that was not going to be the thing that reduced terrorism. Getting them handed over safely and then prosecuted, and then just bump up, like maybe you put some locks on the cockpit doors and stuff, you're fucking basically going to be fine. Instead, we did what we did, and it was because a war, a global war with no end time, is essentially the ideal state to govern your military and economic logic around. And the thing is what's drawing this down, what's making this happen, is that we've entered the lifeboat. That previous model worked with expansion as the undergirding understanding. We will always have frontier to give off. Like the first thing the Republicans did, the first real thing they did in power, besides raise an army to put down the rebellion in the South, was sign the Homestead Act, which opened a vast swath of the Louisiana Purchase to the homesteading of anyone who put down stakes and stayed there for 5 years. Free real estate. On a scale never before done in any Western civilization. That kind of land reform took generations, and in fact never happened in most of Europe. In Latin America, it has also largely been fought and almost not happened, because we imported a European proletariat rather than enslave and then colonize, or not colonize and enslave, an indigenous proletariat, which is the difference between northern and southern colonialisms. But that meant that we could keep people on board even as labor was being exploited, even as war was being fought on mechanistic levels far beyond anyone's consideration even a few years previously. There's always land to give. And once the land gave out, there was, just at that moment, the possibility of global domination. The America being the world hegemon. Just a time to take up for the frontier thesis being closed, being read out of history. Boom. We have the new frontier, and then after World War II, my God, it's beyond empire. It's like global subsumption, something never before even considered by Alexander or Napoleon or Hitler. But that broke apart in the 21st century on the rock, not of 9/11. 9/11 gave us the conditions to pursue our final Icarus-like flight into the sky, our final mad thrust towards control before the fucking rictus set in and our blood vessels started bursting. The last grab of the dying man as he gets pulled down deep by the heart attack. That was Iraq. Iraq was going to be where we made the future safe for America by bedding down the demons we had unleashed by 9/11, which had infiltrated us to the molecular level. And it did the trick, but it was dependent on us winning. And guess what? We didn't. It was not because it's because they overestimated their capabilities. That old collective Dunning-Kruger effect kicked in. They'd spent so much time building themselves up for propaganda purposes to themselves, to the people of the country, the people of the world, America's indomitable power, that they had to assume in a moment of need that it was there. And then, oh, what's this? Oh no, maybe I had a few too many fucking steaks after all. Boom. And that's why we're now in this mad gasp at the end, this grasp, this horrible realization that we're no longer sailing to the frontier. The ship is sinking, and it's grab what you can and go overboard. And that's where all the white nationalism comes from, and that's where like this nascent socialist spurt comes from. But the sad thing and the terrifying thing is that these are just epiphenomenon. Like these political cultures that we think are so important, the new left, the alt-right, or like ethno-nationalists, Pepes, whatever you want to call them, they are steam venting off of a social structure that is inert. They're just the most febrile tendrils because they are the overproduced elite of the dying middle class. They have the time, they have the vocabulary to express their alienation. The vast majority are inert in the sense that they are alienated, but they cannot give meaning or definition to that alienation. And that means that we cannot win at the level of symbol. That's the horror. There's no argument taken place in the discourse, no amount of information, no event reported on will ever give us any sense of power. We will continue to exist in the agonized state of eternal anxiety, of trying something, kind of knowing it doesn't work, but not having any alternative, and so just crossing your fingers and hoping it does. that awful state that drives people to things like fascism, the flight from the freedom of that moment, that uncertainty of like, what am I doing and why? Is this even going to happen? There's a siren. Oh, yes, I know. I remember this. I forgot you could hear it from here. That's the Friday night Shabbos siren to let the Hasids know and the Orthodox know that it's time to get indoors. Yeah, or maybe it's the 9/11 siren. I was with Chris today, and we were walking down the street, and he noticed that there were some cops standing around. And he said, are there more cops out in the streets on 9/11, do you think? And I think, yeah, they probably do it as a show of force thing, but maybe they would say to stop a copycat attack. But it's amazing when you consider that the amount of real estate that was occupied in the average American's brain by anxiety about terrorism, and how that's completely gone. Like, it's not, of course, the terror zone is bigger now, and it contains more things, but terrorism has gone from this giant lobe of fear to this little sliver. And I think part of the reason for that is, can you imagine being an Al-Qaeda guy and bothering blowing up something in the United States? What, so that you could get like a trending topic for 5 minutes? And also, what are you going to do? Like, you're going to set fire to you're going to throw, it's like you're going to dump shit on crap. Like, we're fucked. This place, it sucks. What kind of, like, what are you going to be able to pierce us with like, oh, you blew up a building? First of all, we've seen that already. It's just, terrorism defined our response to the 21st century, defined our economy, doomed us, you could argue, in many ways, to not necessarily to apocalypse, but to less than we could have had otherwise. And now it's a afterthought. What has been spawned out of it has been just this nightmare whirlwind that is so much more monstrous and oppressive that we can't even muster up the energy to concern ourselves with the empty shell, the husk of terrorism that used to fill our minds. Yeah, 9/11, one of the most successful terror attacks in history, depending on who did it. It doesn't matter if it was Mossad or George W. Bush or the Saudi royal family, or it was Al-Qaeda, like that was a thing, or it was a prank. It was somebody was trying to get punked. It was just 4 really shitty pilots who just happened to have all started work on the same day. Oh, the official story of 9/11 accurate, 0% chance. The official story is never true. Just for epistemological reasons, but you're not even getting closer. Any government thing like that, anything that deeply involving matters of state, is basically never more than half true, and that's like at the far, far, far end of the spectrum. I'd say that the official 9/11 story is probably more than 75% false. I'll just say that. But what's in the 25% is the question, and that's what I don't know. And people say, the thing about the passport is, like, that is genuinely wacky, that his passport just floated down out of the thing. That is just kind of comical and eyebrow raising, as I said. But at the same time, why would you do that? Why would you bother with that? Is it like they're not going to piece it together? There isn't a name on a manifest? It just seems like it's such a on-the-nose move. Republicans in general, even if they don't like Trump in particular. And his performance in the last 4 years should, by any logical stretch, make all those people vote against him, or at the very least not show up for him, and tip the balance for even a senile, walking abomination like Biden, who, hey, hey, he's not got it on the ball, but these guys fucked up so bad, and presumably somebody at Biden's White House will know what they're doing. And I think one of the reasons that might not happen, and you might see an unprecedented number of people vote for a president, re-elect a president during like one of the single worst material conditions relative to when they took office that has ever existed. No one has gone farther down in every category: economic, public health, street violence, like a sense of burning the entire West Coast on fire. I mean, a failure to deal with any of these things, and more importantly, as I said, a failure to deal with any of these crises. First, to help manufacture them, and then to fail to deal with them in any way. No one has ever had that and won. I mean, hell, very few have even had that, period. But none have ever had that and won. 2004? Are you fucking kidding me? What are you talking about? That's insane. 9/11 changes the entire thing there. 9/11 redefined that race, redefined that presidency. I mean, hell, there's a world where 9/11 doesn't happen with Bush, but Bush won. 9/11 still doesn't happen. I mean, if he didn't do it, obviously, or he tried to do it and bungled it. One of the big reasons I think they'd fuck it up is because they'd have Halliburton do it for like $500 billion, and they'd end up just like putting an M80 down the toilet at the fucking like Pentagon or something. But say there's no 9/11, Enron might have brought down Bush, not just with the economic drop, but his incredibly close connection to that company. I mean, he flew around in the Enron jet during the campaign. He was Ken Lay was on his short list for energy secretary. It could have been a big deal. But anyway, this is unprecedented. And the reason it doesn't happen is because most people are not psychologically dedicated, have not subsumed their very self and their ambitions and their wants and dreams and their autonomy to a figure on television like Trump when they deal with politics. Now, that's the way. Okay, so the thing I wanted to talk about to start off with is the case in Michigan about the attempted, honestly, I'm sorry, hilarious attempt to kidnap the governor of Michigan and put her on trial for crimes against the Constitution, which was broken up by the FBI thanks to a paid informant. If these guys were Muslim, would anyone take this shit seriously for a second? Is what I ask. Would anybody who is freaking out now about how the Nazis are about to come in, Night of the Long Knives anyone, would anybody be saying that shit? This is the exact same playbook the FBI ran for a decade when people cared about terrorism, which of course now they don't, which is hilarious. If you're old enough to remember after 9/11 when terrorism was the defining social anxiety for a good 5-6 years, now it's off the radar, and so we're all scared of each other. We're done going out there. Like Iraq was the last frontier. We can no longer impose our will on the world, and we all know that at some level. So now the new enemy is within. And so a lot of people who fucking should know better are freaking out because the FBI had some dude who wanted a PlayStation, who got some yahoos to say, hey, you want to abduct the governor? And they go, yeah, let's do it. And now you got guys saying, oh my God, there was going to be a coup in Michigan. Thank God the FBI came and stopped them. The FBI, the guys who killed Fred Hampton and maybe MLK, they're your friends now. They're the good guys. They're the ones saving us from the Nazi hordes. Oh man, that Barry Seal movie, that was amazing. That's like a fucking definition of a limited hangout deal, where they talk about Barry Seal and they say, yeah, sure, the CIA hired him to run guns illegally into Nicaragua to arm the Contras during the Iran-Contra scandal. Yeah, he did that. But he also, while he was doing that, was moving a lot of cocaine for Pablo Escobar into the United States at the same time. And maybe the CIA knew about it and looked the other way, but most of the government didn't know about it. That's the official, and that's a perfect example of a limited hangout, because there is the horror of, oh my God, like they're giving these guns, these drug dealers are arming these terrorists on behalf of the U.S. government. That's amazing. But the idea that the CIA is directing the flow of fucking cocaine into the United States in order to fund a fucking terrorist war in Central America, genocidal fucking attack, no, absurd. Where'd you get? No, look, we're telling you as far as it went. He did move drugs while he was moving the guns, and we maybe looked the other way, but, you know, at the end of the day, he was just an American boy who wanted to do good. And you know what? The fact that he was so ambitious about everything and just wanted money so much, doesn't that just really indict the entire American system, after all? Aren't we all to blame? Move those crack rocks. Meanwhile, you're moving crack rocks. You're turning shit, you're turning pieces into weight. And then back into rocks. After having basically created the modern heroin trade during Vietnam. And then, in Afghanistan, you went from having a situation where the Taliban had been very successful in eradicating opium production, and had brought it into near extinction. Like, it was on the path towards eventual extinguishment. And then the U.S. showed up after 9/11, and after that moment, from that moment on, not till now, Afghanistan has gone from something like in the single digits, or like, I think under 25%, I believe, of world opium production, to 90. Like, oh wow, we couldn't do anything other than let that happen. Like these huge networks of fucking, you know, extremists and guns and uncountable amounts of untraceable cash just going to go out of the country without the U.S. having any idea where it's going. Mm-hmm. Oh God, Charlie Wilson's War, another Sorkin bomb. We honestly, the show goes long enough, we might end up doing every Sorkin property, because I think we've talked about doing a Charlie Wilson's War episode, but we never got around to it. It is absolute dog shit. Now, not just from the standpoint of its awful, typical, like, it's another limited hangout deal. Oh, we armed the Mujahideen. Oh, weren't we stinkers? And then, oh man, Taliban now exists. Darn, fumbled the ball in the end zone. Guess what we get for being too cocky. But Sorkin dialogue, terrible. Philip Seymour Hoffman is the only good thing. He's great as the pissed off CIA guy, who, by the way, was one of the guys who helped administer the fucking the military coup in Greece that led to a wave of disappearances and torture. But the action and the directing, also dog shit. It was like Mike Nichols in his like senescence, when he was just making these boring fucking TV movies. And it's got this amazing, the only action scene in the entire movie, spoiler alert, is a shot of some Mujahideen shooting down a Hind helicopter with a Stinger missile that had been provided to them courtesy of Representative Charlie Wilson in the Operation Cyclone. And it's just these two guys in sandals and headdresses standing on a rock that could have been at fucking Griffith Park. And then they cut to what looks uncannily like stock footage of a Soviet helicopter. And then they cut back to the guy, and he fires the missile. It looks like an SNL sketch. And then they cut to more footage that, swear to God, looks like it's stock of an exploding helicopter. And then they go, yay! Dog shit. It's bad. A Few Good Men, I say, is his best stuff. A Few Good Men is an unimpeachably solid film. I would not really want anything else out of that movie. And, you know, it's also one of his first films. It's one of his first chances he had to show off all of his tricks and shit. And I think the fact that it's a different context and it's different actors than his subsequently used over and over again, you can kind of enjoy the Sorkin stuff without it hitting your ear wrong, because it's not reminding you of the 500 other times he does that same thing, because he has 3 fucking tricks in his sleeve. But it's still, I think it's entertaining. And Rob Reiner, who's certainly nothing more than a journeyman at best, is pretty competent directing it. And of course, Nicholson is fantastic. I have more responsibility than you could possibly fathom. What's so funny about that is that he gets up on his high horse about this shit. And this is in the 90s, though. And this really does show how America was grasping towards the Cold War without even knowing it. How we needed to reestablish, like, the threat matrix of an external enemy like the Soviets for our entire defense posture and our relationship to our military to make sense. Like, we have to find a new one, because this is the end of the Cold War, and fucking Nicholson has this giant stem-winding speech that's supposed to, like, cut to the quick and make you question your assumptions as a pious liberal, and it comes down to, I'm afraid the Cubans are going to get me. Even though I'm hanging out in a fucking, I mean, this is a post-war world where America is the dominant hegemon of the entire globe. Everybody else is either building themselves up or putting back the pieces together. And this got their colonial outposts in front of, like, a cowed, economically sanctioned pariah state that we've, like, waged unceasing war on for 50 fucking years. And they're gonna I sleep 200 yards from 5,000 Cubans who are trained to kill me. It's like, yeah, they're gonna come over the fucking wire any day now. It's absurd in the moment. But, like, our culture, it didn't have time. 9/11 showed up just in time to, like, catch the foot as we were spinning off into nothing. Like, catch us on the next rung of the ladder, move us along. Oh, good. Now the world makes sense again. Because for a while there, we were in a real fucking personality crisis. We were in a real crisis of identity there. And 9/11 came along, Modun, either because it was an inside job and it was the state making it happen, or because we were literally just driving into it as a culture subconsciously because of our, like, Zardoz-esque death urge to find meaning at the end of history. Because we've been so deeply accultured to this barracks mentality and this apocalyptic framework of confrontation that our institutions could not survive becoming decadent. We could not survive the end of the Punic War any better than the Roman Republic could. And now we find, oh no, this replacement has only accelerated the process. Because the process was always accelerating. It was just disguised by some freak moments of unprecedentedly ill-distributed capital accumulation after World War II. Pubic War. Indeed. Indeed. Indeed, sir. The Pubic War. Yeah, because the alternative to that apocalyptic confrontational framework is a climb down from our position at the head of this thing, a chance to put the gun down and, like, close our eyes for a bit, and step down from our position as this globostridic hegemon, and also as the consumer of last resort and the primary just mouth. And that means, like, not a drop in standard of living if you're talking about a, like, redistribution of wealth. If wealth is genuinely redistributed, you could eliminate profit and replace it with public welfare in a way that reduces any kind of, like, felt material deprivation. Even if maybe there aren't many toothpastes you can choose in the fucking aisle, it wouldn't matter because you wouldn't care, because you'd have other things. Like fucking healthcare. Like roads you could drive on. Like some sort of guaranteed government income / job program. I know those things are always fighting each other. I don't know. You guys figure it out. Those things could be achieved while, like, allowing other countries to absorb, like, a redistribution of, you know, of economic activity. And we never had the political constituency for that. Because by the time the crisis came, our political system was wholly subsumed into a totally separate class of humans. Like a that has almost no real participation from the working class at this point. And that reestablishing that connection has to be paramount. UT. But as I said, I don't know. It's fun to talk about. It's fun to speculate about. But I don't know. Yeah, Godfather 3 actually talks about all this shit. And in Godfather 3, they show the fucking John Paul I getting poisoned. And I honestly feel like that one's almost an open and shut case. I feel like he was probably, as close as I'm going to get to confident, I'm going to say that John Paul I was fucking gacked. That this dude coming in here and taking, he wanted to look at the books, is the thing. And that was not going to happen. 33 days in the pontificate. But yeah, not over any doctrinal issues, just purely covering their asses related to the giant drug money laundering operation that they had going. That's a thing that I don't think is a question. Whether or not the assassinations happened is up in the air. But whether or not the Vatican was laundering drug money for the mafia and the CIA, I don't think there's a question about that one. Which is kind of nuts when you think about it, because that does sound like crazy conspiracy gibberish. And it often gets put in with other stuff that is more outlandish. But it's basically established fact. And it doesn't change anything. And that's my real problem with conspiracy theory as a heuristic, is that it presupposes that revelation of the secret will somehow change the reality. The end result of every conspiracy narrative is a generalized awareness. It's supposed to end in a congressional hearing or a opening of files or testimony that brings to light a secret reality that people aren't aware of. And that's why Q is the perfect accelerated version of this, because it imagines an apocalyptic revelation. All that you knew, all the people you thought were trusted custodians of power or celebrities are actually demonic creatures bent on your destruction. And we are saving you from them. And that's not how it's going to work. If we're going to beat any of this shit, it's not because people are going to know how bad everything is. The thing about hyperreality is everybody knows, as fucking Leonard Cohen would say. Everybody knows. All the worst thing you could imagine, everybody at a base level knows. If we found out tomorrow that Bush did 9/11, it wouldn't change anything. It would go from a thing that people kind of thought was true to like, yeah, there you go. I have figures. We have normalized everything because at a bone deep level we know, and we just distract ourselves from that reality by carrying out these ritualized political performances that imbue our life with meaning and drama and distract us from that fundamental truth. And so nothing based on like educating people about like what the bad guys did and who they are is going to do anything. Knowledge alone will do nothing. Only knowledge that is generated from action is anything that can be built upon. And that's what comes from people doing things together and finding in the doing of things together purpose. Is the bird drinking? The bird's drinking, Chris.
I've been watching it.
We were worried the bird wasn't going to drink. That motherfucker is guzzling. Very happy to see it. I love a good drinking bird. Don't we all love, folks? We love it. The bird, he drinks. He's the best. He's the best at drinking. They say he's the best there is. I don't know. I honestly think it might be me, folks. I think I drink better. I drink really good. I use both hands. Never spill a drop. Never get a drop spilled. Ever. Never spill a drop on my tie. The silk ties. Most interesting cult. Okay, now we're talking. I mean, Shinrikyo is fascinating on a million levels. Just how big it got, how deeply it penetrated Japanese mass culture. I mean, the guy was a regular. The guy Shoko Hashihara, the head of Shinrikyo, was a regular late night talk show guest. He was like he was like Paul Rudd on Conan O'Brien. Like he would come on and he'd show the clip from Mac and Me. They had compounds all over Japan, one in the outback of Australia. They had they purchased Soviet surplus military equipment, including helicopters. They manufactured machine guns. They, of course, had the sarin. They might have been pursuing the purchase of or construction of a nuclear weapon. They had an astounding amount of actual practical scientific know-how because they recruited so heavily among scientists. And it was commercialized. The guy sold his bathwater in vials. He sold a spaghetti strainer you could put on your head that would give you the same thoughts as Shoko Ashihara. Amazing. Yeah, and then when you think about the fact that it all kind of blew up, I mean, they were planning to create a nuclear war. They were essentially like spiritual. They were like Eastern Posadists coming at it from the other side, cleansing the earth and then rising from with nuclear fire, and then rising from the ashes. And they ended up doing this Tokyo subway attack as a distraction because they were about to get raided by the cops. Eventually, finally, after they just ignored them doing insane murders for years, partially because there were police officers and people in the Justice Department, whatever they want to call it, who were high level and also members of the group. It's astounding. So whenever I think of an interesting cult, just in terms of its complexity, its structure, and its ambition, Shinrikyo is up there. And I don't know who it was, but somebody pointed out that the case if you wanted to, the Shinrikyo is essentially what people claimed Al Qaeda was. Like Shinrikyo, in its capacity and its intent, were what the Western media after 9/11 claimed Al Qaeda was, in terms of its sophistication of its structures and its ability to access weaponry and up to and including chemical and biological and perhaps nuclear. Also, an army of totally loyal and willing acolytes, with a goal of world destruction. That was Al Qaeda in the Western imagination, and yet it was essentially destroyed as a threat by arresting a bunch of people. Meanwhile, Al Qaeda, which was never anything like Shinrikyo as a threat, becomes the focal point of a new foreign policy. But of course, that's because it was all a lie. It was a new guiding principle of the eternal war economy that needed a new narrative justification after the fall of the Soviet Union. Just like you could argue that 9/11 was the inevitable result of our foreign policy and our pursuit of oil dominance through ideological and guerrilla warfare. But you could also write a story where the reason this keeps happening in the same direction and that all these dominoes keep falling the same way is because there's some hands out there pushing them in that direction. And for me, it's a moot point because the reality is the same either way. And honestly, the recipe is the same. The boring, no matter how outlandish or banal you want to make your explanation of reality, the remedy is very boringly straightforward. Organizing the working class, or rather the working class organizing itself, rediscovering itself, awakening from its slumber. That's the only thing that's going to beat this. No matter where it's coming from, no matter who you think is in charge, and also how seriously you take it. Like, to me, there's no more annoying and banal conversation than the one that has been had ever since Trump lost, about how seriously we should take this. Is this a serious? Is this a coup? Is this a real serious thing? And it's such a stupid argument because it never really
Nobody ever wants to make an argument about what they think is going to happen. It has to be couched in, well, it's bad, and you should feel bad about it. And to that I say, hey, let me accept every premise of every hysteric on the internet who says that this is the beginning of a fascist coup. What the fuck do you want me to do about it? And the answer seems to be feel anxious about it. Feeling anxiety is literally, the feeling of anxiety is like the emotional cattle prod that they strap to our nuts every day of our fucking lives to get them to do whatever they fucking want us to. Managing our anxiety is how they get us to be good fucking compliant neoliberal subjects. Our anxiety is the cultural manifestation of the coercive mechanisms of control. And you want me to feel more anxiety about something I can't do anything about? But what we're going to see from the Democrats is going to be us an attempt to do essentially like Bushism. Like these guys are trying to talk about this as 9/11, as bad as 9/11. They want it to be their 9/11. That's the point of this. This is going to be the Democrats' 9/11, that they get to wave the bloody shirt at the Republicans, which honestly could help them. Because looking at the polls, this is not a popular thing that happened. And even though there's all these like well-manicured gerrymandering structures that allow the Republicans to hold power, I do not think that the wealthy older white people who voted in the Democrats are liking any of this. And a lot of them who voted in split tickets for Republicans might start punishing Republicans. Now, just in the same way, but the thing is, all these fucking guys in the House who live in gerrymandered Republican districts, they can't go against Trump because they will be gone by the end of business day. And so they're going to get to wave the bloody shirt and use it as an excuse for a democratic application of police state technology and surveillance and incarceration. Because neoliberalism has finally come for the whites. I mean, it came for the poor whites a long time ago, but it finally came for the voters. It came for the people who have had a little chunk of that post-war magic, and now it's shrinking away. And this is not negotiable shit, and their political movement is too inarticulate to challenge capitalism realistically. It will be suborned, it will be reduced, it will be recuperated, and that which cannot be will be repressed. That's the fucking playbook. And the Republicans, oh boy, I mean, at this point it's clear they will never accept the results of a close election that go against them again. And that means every election will essentially be a tip ball. And that helps the Democrats too, though, because if it's close enough and they lose it, it's just Bush versus Gore again. Everything's kept going. Everybody kept getting paid. It didn't break anything. The system maintained itself. You just like slowly, and then the Democrats are a regional party, maybe, like run New York and California. I would like to say also, just while I'm here, that everything I said about the Democrats trying to take the Capitol insurgency as a new 9/11 and an attempt to recreate the war on terror domestically, it's all happening according exactly as that was said to happen. They got the media rounds going, former National Security Council members, former military leaders, Democrats saying we need to reorient our intelligence agencies towards internal threats. And there's even now a trial balloon being launched about creating a domestic spy agency, because technically the CIA isn't allowed to spy domestically, and the FBI is not an intelligence service. The NSA, of course, also. No. And the pitch will be, this is justice. This is justice. Not making anything better for anybody, making everything equally bad for everyone, which of course is ironic and hilarious because that is the conservative critique of socialism, right? Oh, it doesn't make everybody conservative. Capitalism is about spreading wealth, and socialism is about spreading the poverty around, making everybody equally poor.
And, of course, that's dumb, but it does apply to the logic of liberalism. Logic of liberalism, because it has a ceiling on how much it can offer normal people anything other than subsistence and alienation, and more than anything, the knowledge that they are disposable is to alleviate their sense of felt differentiation and treatment from others. That's it. That you can do. The QAnon movement in the next years. Absurd. But I will say the funniest thing about it is people insist that you can't talk about Q in the context of causes. You can't talk of the immiseration, or more specifically, the destabilization of formerly secure economic positions that makes people more vulnerable to this stuff. You can't talk about that because that lets them off the hook for their racism and their hatred and their evil, which is exactly what conservatives said about terrorism. When you would say, hey, how about we make it so that fewer people in the Middle East want to kill us by, I don't know, scaling back our imperial designs on the region? No, that is giving virtue to these people. This is not focusing on their wrong and sinfulness. It's the exact same approach, which makes sense because they're trying to create a fucking a internal white terror 9/11 context for them to stave off critique of Biden and justify expanded internal surveillance and repression. I don't think it's going to work. And I said this on the show, but the big reason that the war on terror went the way it did is because the Republicans had a willing partner in the Democrats. Like, they were both on the same, they were, in wrestling parlance, after 9/11, the Democrats were happy to play along and to be the heel, to admit their weakness, basically, to admit that they were wrong, to admit that the Republican view of the war on terror, the Republican view of foreign policy, the Republican view on what it meant was the correct one, and that the only difference between the parties is that the Democrats do a better job of it. The Democrats are going to try it, but here you've got an opponent who will no-sell you. The Republicans, as we saw in the impeachment hearing, none of them, they got 10 votes? They were not falling all over each other to say, look, we understand this was a huge deal. We're so sorry. We have to look into ourselves. Nope. They said, actually, you guys said that riots were good last summer, so you're hypocrites. Fuck you. And without it's like when Rowdy Piper would do a chop, like slap the chops of Hulk Hogan, and he would just start going, and he would no-sell it. That's the Republicans here. So that means that the dynamic is not going to persist, and they're not going to be able to wave the bloody shirt the way they want to. But man, the media and their handmaidens are going to try as hard as they can to do it. Holy shit, it's going to be nonstop banging this drum. But I think that was the high water mark. Maybe wrong, and if I'm wrong, I'll apologize. But even with only a few weeks retrospect, it looks like that Capitol Hill thing was the high water. It was the Pickett's charge. It was the culmination of a movement. And then when Trump disavowed it immediately, got kicked off social media, and then slunk away with his tail between his legs, and then Biden got in there with no problem, I think that the momentum will be dissipated. That doesn't mean that violence will go away. Like I've said, stochastic violence, stochastic political violence is here to stay, I think. But the idea that there's a genuine Trump threat to our horrifyingly, banally evil mechanisms of democratic government is going to become more absurd as time goes on.
Which is pretty great. Did you see that there's a Uyghur wing of Al Qaeda that was involved, that's been involved in Afghanistan since the fucking since 9/11, before 9/11, and which the U.S. military waged a offensive specifically against in 2018 in Afghanistan, has now been taken off of the terrorist watch list. It's no longer a terrorist group. I mean, fuck. I don't really think there's going to be a war, but you certainly see how the momentum in both parties, this is where it's very important, is towards some sort of confrontation of China. And it really is interesting. Like, there was this spurious case that Trump was like an anti-interventionist, remember? That Trump counted as the peace candidate. And there are a bunch of people who say that's still true because they're convinced that Hillary Clinton would have like gone to war in Syria if she'd been in charge. And I mean, you know, who knows? But on the big question that's on the horizon of China, the one that really matters, on that one, Bush and Biden are on the same page. And there is a totally coherent, broad, right-wing, Q-pilled argument for why we got to go to war with China, just as there is a woke, pink-washed one. And, I mean, look at the way that, look at Ben Garrison to understand how, if you get another right-wing government in there, that they're not going to cool down the rhetoric about China. It's only going to continue ratcheting up. Is that he always has Xi like as a demonic eminence gris behind Biden and stuff, and it's dumb, but it's coherent. You know, look at this communist country that wants to undermine America. They have all this money, and look, our Democrats have been selling them our debt and all this, and you know, you can just pull out yellow peril stuff. And then you got Biden talking about how we need to win the competition for the 21st century, which is insane. And that's why no politics that's fixated on tracking like momentum and influence within the two-party system is worth anyone's time as anything other than as a entertainment, like keeping up with the ball scores. Because at the real points of the real consequential issues and like the conflict with China, that shit is like at the very tip top. Because not only is that's more than anything the framework for the continued justification for our military structure. It's also a genuine live resource contest like we had during the first Cold War. And it's ideologically charged too. Now, there's not going to be a war, I don't think, but there's going to be a continued ratcheting of hostility to create like this conditions of a war minus the actual catastrophic conflict. And that's going to be the interest of both parties. It's all amenable to both sides, if it was possible. There's a different energy in, you know, rushing at a cockpit, like Flight 93 style, if you've got a pilot on the plane who you know could land it, than if you don't. You have, like, you think about it longer. You plan more ahead. You coordinate your actions better because your fear has been overwhelmed by your belief in your future if you work together. You don't have a fucking pilot, and the pilots are dead, and there's these guys aiming the plane, a 747. You'll fight for yourself. We know that, and unless that didn't happen, who knows? But like, I believe that's a possible result. I believe if people knew that a plane was been hijacked, they might do it, if not to just sit there, because they'd be driven there by fear, but they'd be driven there purely by fear. By animal fear, untethered to reason, because they wouldn't really have any reason to believe that they'd actually survive. They're just frantically acting. And an understanding of this dynamic, reading history through this lens, seeing this dynamic play out throughout history and in the world around us, applying that dialectical lens, it salves us. It soothes our fear and allows us to see the world through more clear eyes, because we are not being ever so momentarily made anxious by the bleeping alarm sound, the knowledge that we're on a fucking Flight 93 with no auxiliary pilot. But if you really do, you have that knowledge tethered to some transcendent understanding of the world, some transcendent understanding of meaning residing beyond the self. That gives you praxis. And so that is why I can't really ever, that's why I really sympathize with Robinson in reading this book, because I feel like with a lot of these talks that I'm doing and a lot of my like, I guess you'd call it artistic project, pretentiously, of my career, insanely, you could call it, has been to give voice to that understanding, that dialectical fixedness, that explanatory framework, because it can soothe fear a little bit. It can give you reason to believe that there's a possibility that there are machinery we can grasp. If we can push ourselves out of the matrix together, there's machinery in our grasp.
How amazing is it that the Taliban very well could take control formally of Afghanistan's government on the 20th anniversary of 9/11? Can you just get your head around that? And even if it isn't, it'll be close enough for government work. 20 fucking years. 20 years. All of it thanks to America's choice. A chosen war of aggression. We know this because we know that the Taliban offered in fall of 2001 exactly what we have now, or what we're going to have now, which is a Taliban as part of a government. At least. But without, and Al-Qaeda and Bin Laden handed over on a fucking plate to the United States. Or at the very least, like executed in Afghanistan. Could have had that deal. And instead we got this. And you cannot say that it was a mistake. This is the important thing. That it was a bungle or a fuck up or a missed opportunity. We've been, ever since the fall of the Soviet Union, the United States have been blindly groping for a political agenda that could fit the underlying economic necessity of a continued war economy. The United States, after World War II, was premised on military spending in order to maintain a military hegemony that then undergirds an economic hegemony, a global capitalist system that is not distributed evenly across the globe, but that is concentrated in the United States, where the entire global economy acts as a ratchet pulling towards the United States, like the big black hole. And that regime is an imperial regime, and that regime is undergirded by imperial relationships. But thanks to technology, more than anything, that imperialism no longer has to be formal. So that means no more colonies. Instead, you have trade networks and the US dollar, and then after the 70s, the petrodollar. But it's also upheld by the military. It's upheld by this force projection that makes the American dollar the safest place for value to be stored. Because we have the fucking capacity to assert our fucking will, which is what is the actual basis for the value of currency. It has nothing to do with intrinsic value of precious metals or anything else. It doesn't have to do with any
transcendent notion of value. It is the power of the state to affirm the exchange that involves that currency. And thanks to our military, the United States is the world currency that is most affirmable militarily. So therefore, the most stably store of value. So we get to be the consumers at the end of the supply chain. Our consumption gets to fuel the entire machinery. And the context whereby we affirmed that after World War II was in the context of a Cold War with the Soviet Union, a conflict of values between democracy and totalitarianism, or freedom and conformity, whatever bullshit we wanted to jack ourselves off about. With the Soviet Union, that prerogative fell away, and the nakedness of American empire became clear. And there was a crisis at first. There was a lot of talk in Washington about something they called a peace dividend at the end of the Soviet Union. All that money we spent in the military should come back, but that would undermine America's consumer economy. It would undermine the machinery we had made. So there had to be a new modus vivendi. George H.W. Bush started it off by essentially entrapping Saddam Hussein into invading Kuwait. They entrapped him like fucking Marion Barry so that they could affirm the America as the global policeman after the global policeman of the New World Order. But that doesn't really have the same persuasive power of a civilizational crisis, so we just kind of drifted even after that. Hell, that war couldn't even get fucking Bush reelected, for Christ's sake. And then Clinton spent 8 years struggling for something. Hey, what if we bomb the Serbs? Some kind of argument for why we have this giant military. And then 9/11 happened. And this, for me, is why we will never get rid of the sneaking suspicion that 9/11 was an inside job, because it fulfilled a historic role that seems outlandish to have just occurred exogenously to the system. But of course, the thing to remember is it wasn't. It was the outcome of all of this. It was the outcome of America's imperial power play. It was blowback. But when we received the blowback from 9/11, there was no accountability. There's no danger. There's no concern. Oh no, people are going to realize that we brought this on ourselves, because they have a new story to tell now. And it does not involve making a deal with the Taliban to hand over bin Laden, and then we all have to sit around and say, hey, why did that happen? Why did these guys blow this place up? No, because where does that lead? It sure as shit doesn't lead to another argument, another tale to tell to justify a globe-spanning empire. Fuck no. And if you have both parties on board, and you have, more importantly than that, you have the military-industrial bureaucracy. Forget even the money involved. Just the sheer weight of bureaucratic momentum, and then the specific desires of the freaks in the Bush White House. Nobody's going to take that deal. They're going to fucking put pedal to the metal. Hell, they went to Iraq more than anything in order to keep that energy going somewhere. They ran out of good targets to blow up in Afghanistan. Rumsfeld was pushing Iraq from day one because they wanted a fucking project. And Afghanistan, even though it's crucial in like geostrategic terms in Central Asia, where it's positioned, especially related to things like opium and fucking pipelines, compared to the motherfucking Middle East, it's a total backwater. They needed someplace at the center of the great game. And the great game had moved south and west. So the stake had to be driven in. And also, if you're going to keep this new war footing, it requires continued pressure and continued threat, because eventually people are going to normalize that 9/11 happened. So you have to create the prospect of future 9/11s. And it's like the joke about, like, bin Laden said that
the point of doing 9/11 was to make America destroy itself through imperial overreach. And people say, he's getting exactly what he wants. Well, it's what he wanted, but way more importantly than that it's what he wanted, it's what the system demanded. It's what was required for the system to continue. And the system will continue because it can no longer, post-Soviet Union, be resisted or is resisted in the current moment in any coherent way. We have a broken working class, a broken humanity, and we are at the mercy of this thing, and we have been for a while. By the time 9/11 happened, we had been declassified. We had been atomized. And the last 20 years has been only the continued acceleration of that process as the systemic shocks, the environmental and resource-based shocks are accumulating in the system and creating this spiral of destabilization that is now reverberating through our entire political structure. And it's undermining the system's ability to continue. And that is what makes it so hard sometimes to understand how this shit works, because nobody actually in charge wants things to be the way they are. Like, that's why people have to invent lizard men who want to eat babies, because there is no human desire for where we are and where we're going. Nobody wants the world to cook. Nobody wants it. Maybe there's a few nihilist psycho billionaires who think they're going to Mars, but they are a fraction of people, and they have no power. Their money is what has power. Nobody wants this, but we're getting it because we have lost the fight for control of the technological mechanisms. What we lost it to was capitalism, was the programming, was the machine. Skynet became self-aware. And so the thing that would have been best for humanity by any stretch, including the ruling classes of America, after 9/11 would have been an inward, as is always the case, it would have been an inward look towards, actually creating democracy, just like it would have been better after World War II if we'd had a Henry Wallace-led rapprochement with the Soviets and a mutual progress towards decolonization instead of the Cold War. And if we had gotten a real reconstruction after World War I, after the Civil War, and if we'd gotten a German Revolution after World War I. And at every turn, the wrench moved, the human intervention in the system became less. Our ability to actually do our regular lives and make it mean anything has changed, has reduced. We still have power, and this is why this is beyond black pill. We still have power. We're all humans. We literally are in charge of this thing still. But we cannot be humans the way we are now and stop it. If the incentive structures that are built into our social relationships, if followed, if rationally followed, will prevent us from ever meaningfully resisting this thing until it's too late, if it isn't already.
Let's do two guys at once because you want to see the rise of the democracy and then its first falter with Van Buren. So stuff like that. Yeah. All right. Let's see. Here's an interesting one, Matt. A kind of counterfactual. If you could make the other guy win in any election, which one would it be?
That's a good one. That's good, and I actually hadn't thought of this. All right, let me think. So yeah, like flip. Okay. All right.
Because we've done a lot.
I mean,
okay, go.
Honestly, just as like a way to test things, because there seemed to be such a wide variety of counterfactuals, and because that presidency ended up being like the fulcrum of our entire lives as adults, got to be Bush Gore, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, that's
because does 9/11 happen?
Mm-hmm.
If it does, is the result the same?
I mean,
there's a lot of questions.
Getting to teleport into the universe, where Bush Gore was resolved the other way for like 30 seconds and just doing the quick Google for 9/11.
Yeah, just let me go to. Let me see what happened, man.
Yeah.
And also, though, there's other ones because you further back you go, the more things get loose. William Jennings Bryan over McKinley in '96. Do you see like populism like develop as the response to robber baron capitalism instead of middle class led progressivism, which is what we ended up getting under Roosevelt?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a Bryan presidency changes the contours of that political reshaping.
Yeah, and then possibly leads to 25 years later, a Democratic Party that's maybe more amenable to the European style, like socialist parties, stuff like
who
that.
knows? Who knows? How does it sharpen the basically the question for anything really coming between the Civil War and the early 30s is what could be different that could have sharpened the conflict between labor and capital once the crisis occurs in the late 20s, early 30s.
See, I saw
that's.
Oh yeah. But in the late 20s, early 30s, because you think that, that's the moment. Yeah. So you're
like if you have a populism as opposed to progressivism that just ends up being assimilated into this Republican hegemony in the 20s. Maybe you get something more radically based, less grounded in the middle class than what we got. So yeah, I'd say Bryan over McKinley in also. And this was a close one, which sadly the McKinley-Bryan election wasn't. So this one is tantalizing because it was a close one. Henry Clay over James K. Polk in 1844. An election that came down to a few thousand votes in New York. And I think we might have discussed this, but ended up turning on a bunch of abolitionists voting for the Liberty Party in protest instead of the Whigs, who were, if not anti-slavery, more resistant to slave interests than the Democrats. But they wanted to keep themselves pure. So the Bernie Bros were the first spoilers in a presidential election in that respect, because if you don't have Polk, I don't know if you have the Mexican War.
All right. So FDR dying in his third term.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fascinating one. We talked about this on Chapo, but HW taking over for Reagan is fascinating just because so much of Reagan's ability to assimilate people to the reality of, a new economic order and a new destruction of the entitlements of American citizenship was personality based and narrative based, and the sort of the unalloyed exoskeleton of George H.W. Bush carrying that stuff out is maybe a little less amenable to people. Who knows?
Yeah.
Let me think of another one.
I think of an interesting reversal of this is if McKinley doesn't get plugged and Teddy doesn't ascend at that young age from that position, because again, I was just gonna say, because again, he was put in the vice presidency to derail his political career. So it would probably just be more Republican business as usual.
It's funny to imagine Cheney taking over for Bush after 9/11.
Yeah.
Once again, a thing where like a lizard face carrying out this thing instead of a bluff hardy dimwit that everybody feels like they can have a beer with.
Would it have been more difficult to sell the if Bush had died in 9/11? Like if he had been in the wrong place and they actually like struck the White House or something. And Cheney got in there, would he have been able to sell the Iraq War as well as Bush could have?
That's the reason that everybody sighs at the end when we saw it, is because they're like, fuck, we couldn't have our knowledge consummated. And that's really what it's more about. It's about how even if you know what happened, you can never be satisfied. It's not that you can't know. It's that knowing does not provide the satisfaction the culmination that knowing is supposed to. Because if we're not seeking knowledge of what's really going on, then what else are we doing, right? But what does that knowledge gain us? Nothing. It can't gain us anything. Because we can know anything and it won't change our behavior. That's why you want to talk about great songs that speak to the specific contours of modern alienation from the self. Leonard Cohen's Everybody Knows. Everybody knows that the dice are loaded. Everybody knows the war is over. Everybody knows the good guys lost. Like, people want to, if only everybody knew who killed Kennedy. It's like, what? 2/3 of the population think that in some way or another the government was responsible for the assassination of President Kennedy. What are they doing about it? Why would that number going to 100 change anything? And that is the fundamental problem with conspiracy theory as a heuristic for understanding history or the current moment. Not that those things didn't happen. Of course they happen. You cannot have a global capitalist hegemony without a full coercive apparatus. We have some fantasy, even with a relatively radical critique of American imperialism, that there's the places where we coerced capitalism into being, and the places where we basically bribed it into being. But no, every level of social order, from the President of the United States, if his name is John Kennedy, to exploited workers and certainly minority workers in America, there are people who have to be brought along coercively, outside of the law. Because remember, we're talking about how there's X amount of coercion that needs to maintain a class rule, right? Over time, that number has to get bigger because there's more people who are being exploited. Their exploitation is organizing them around the feeling of being exploited. It requires more output. There has to be a escalation of coercion. Now, part of that is buying off some people so they're not fighting, so that they don't have to be coerced. And that makes it easier to concentrate on those who cannot be reconciled in any way to the system as it exists. And so that doesn't just mean imperialism in the third world. It means assassinating the president if he gets out of line. It doesn't understand what's going on. Doesn't understand the real context of America's victory in World War II, or the real consequences. Like when the United States decided to go to war with the Soviets and with the former colonial countries on behalf of the political order that that Imperial Europe and Japan had left on the world. They decided we are going to put this thing back together, Frankenstein style. And that means we're going to have to repress the fuck out of a lot of people. And that includes people at the heart of empire. And so it's no coincidence that as the CIA is being formed, you have the creation of, or you have the Red Scare, this cultural war on communism that has political effects in the form of purging the most progressive elements of the Democratic Party coalition, which could have steered the U.S. towards some sort of negotiated co-management of the post-war world with Russia. And I know that seems insane, and it's like, yes, the moment FDR's brain caved in, that possibility went away. As soon as Truman, the fucking party hack from Missouri, whose mom was a Southern partisan who talked about much about how she fucking thought it was good that Lincoln was assassinated, and when she went to the White House to visit her son, she wouldn't sleep in the Lincoln bedroom. So, like, you've got this cultural package in this guy, coupled with the fact that he owed his position to the Democratic Party, not to the coalition of left-wing and progressive forces that was centered in the Democratic Party, but which had come together in a popular front to win World War II, in alliance with the Soviet Union. The question was, will that alliance continue into the task of rebuilding the world, or will it turn into war? And we made the choice to do that. The story we get told is that Stalin was this, he basically closed the Iron Curtain down, said, no, fuck you. And we had to, in order to defend freedom, match that. But that's not what happened. This is what's happening, by the way, while the CIA is being built, while Truman is authorizing the building of the CIA. Oh yeah, no, and the thing is, Truman was like progressive for the time. He had genuine progressive values. He wanted to continue the New Deal, but he hated communism more. And he didn't hate communism merely because he was an apparatchik of the Democratic Party. He also hated it for visceral personal reasons. Because it suggested miscegenation. Now again, you say, oh, you're talking about, this is idealism. No, why is Truman there to be president in the first place? Because the left couldn't keep Wallace on the ballot at the 44 convention. This is where you see that by the time you get to the creation of something like the CIA, the die has been cast. And so while you can describe what the CIA does, up to and including assassinating the president, doing MK Ultra mind control, selling, building up every network of large-scale drug sales in the world, standing up the cartel system that the global supply chain then piggybacked on top of. They did all that shit, but they did it in a context where the social muscle necessary to like really resist the imposition of capitalism on its own terms, which the New Deal state had pushed against and was being eroded away from the position of like being able to sustain. What that meant is that while the CIA had to do what they did to maintain the position they were on, they were not doing it in a context where any of their discrete actions were determinative. They were always happening after the decision had been made, after the crucial real battle between the global working class, the global proletariat, humanity at large, and the algorithm that is like parasitically sitting atop like the human institutions of capitalism, of the capitalist like developed world. And so, while you can map the terrain, fixating on proving specific events within the context of the deep state and with the context of our understanding of like the role intelligence plays as a crucial buttress to the structure, the greater structure of capitalism, like it's a necessary component. It cannot be done away with. The CIA still exists and does stuff. Although I would argue that now intelligence is more of like a make-work program. Because one of the things the CIA did was make itself obsolete. Like it didn't have to intervene at those crucial points anymore because they didn't have to worry about those moments arising. Because instead of trying to do Keynesian, like inefficient, mid-century modernist shit, like brainwash individual people, the market can just unleash the product of raw research carried out under like the funding of the government, privatize this technology of the internet that is going to structure human life in a way that is going to tear us out of any kind of social context where our actions can have political consequences. That's why we can, as an entertainment only, for entertainment purposes only, we can observe the arc of the intelligence state. But if our politics become applying a a heuristic of conspiracy to every event as it unfolds, that will only lead you into inevitable neutralization by the fact that that process, the process of just taking individual events as they happen and then trying to make a narrative out of them, given the bric-a-brac of culture that you absorb, that is how reactionary popular culture is made. That is how reactionary mass politics, such as it exists, can be made, is through those narratives. What socialism, what Marxism is supposed to do is allow you to look at events as they happen. Neutralize that need to go down a fucking rabbit hole and find someone to punish like you're in a fucking movie. And get to the question of, how do I improve my conditions? How do I improve the conditions of my children? How do I make the world I live in conform with any kind of value for what human life means? But, my God, no, I can't do that. I have to solve the riddle of who did 9/11, or I have to expose the plandemic. Like, okay, good, go for it. You're going to end up never finding out why. And what I mean by that is, you will convince yourself, you've already convinced yourself. What you will not have is what you're dreaming about, the fantasy that is pulling you forward, which is that the revelation changes something, a fundamental fact about your life in the world, catalyzes a reaction. Because even if you are just like a person who likes to talk about conspiracy theories and has no contribution to the research, and somebody else pulls out a smoking gun, you're going to feel like you were part of it, and that it's your victory. That's the reason you're involved in this. And the other people involved in this, they're trying to get off. You're all trying to get off. Now you can think in your head, I'm trying to get off because I want to overthrow the structures of capitalism that stop us from being able to organize. And it's like, okay, yeah, I understand you want to do that. But 9 out of the 10 of the people who are doing it with you don't care about that shit. They want a narrative of violence. They want someone to blame. Then they want to come together to make them suffer, which is the fucking narrative. That's the mass political narrative that fascism offers as an alternative to the pursuit of socialism as a utopian nirvana. It is, no, nirvana's a utopian horizon, I should say. No, utopian horizons are impossible. It is man against man. There can be no deep cooperation between people. We are strangers to each other, which means we will all eventually destroy one another until there's only one left. And so then we must seek out our enemies and destroy them. And how do we find our enemies? We see who does the bad things in the world, and we try to punish them. That's where Q comes from. That is why the center of gravity of conspiracy theories about the Kennedys and stuff has drifted rightward. You can argue, oh, it's because the left hasn't taken it seriously enough. No, the libidinal gravitational pull has dragged it there. That's why Alex Jones became a reactionary, because he's selling a politics not of the hard boring of actually changing things, but of a fantasy. A fantasy of consummation through violence. You're never going to get there is the thing. You're just going to keep running until you smash into this is the death drive enthroned that represented as fascism that can only be distinguished from from capitalism in any other condition. What's the difference between it is the conditions, the material conditions under which capitalism is operating. That is what the only difference is. Now the reason that the conflict overseas is now Iraq and not Vietnam. But the one song on there that has always stuck with me is this Clem Snide song called The Ballad of David Icke, or Ike, however you fucking pronounce it. The English lizard person guy. The secret rulers of the world have stolen my girl. That one I remember, that of all those things on that album, that's the one that has stuck with me, because that's the one that got deeper than just Bush is a chimp. That's the one that spoke to a thing that eventually became a dominant cultural vocabulary of
lizards, of secret cabals, of demons, orchestrating things from behind the scenes. But even then, I gotta say, for myself, I was never attracted to that as a literal description or as a heuristic for identifying bad actors. To me, it more spoke to the fact that to hold a high position in a system like we have is to be turned into a lizard, is to have your humanity, your basic human connection, drained of you. Not that you are part of some immortal race that is directing human affairs, but that you're a human among humans who is brought into a position of lizardness, of where your blood has to turn cold in order to carry out the agenda, which is inhuman, which is reptilian, but not carried in any mind or heart of any biological entity, but in the very sinews of commerce, media, governance, the world system itself. But this is, like, even though the lizard thing is a great metaphor and can make you think about institutions in a meaningfully critical way, what happens if you use that metaphor enough? It becomes literal. And then you have to start looking for the reptilians, and you have to start trying to justify your faith in the existence of reptiles. And all of your, anything meaningful gets lost in the noise. Because what do people want to hear? Do they want to hear that their institutions have enslaved them? Or that there are lizard people out there in positions who can be overturned? That the institutions we have are being perverted and warped, and they can be reclaimed. That the Constitution can be reasserted in all of its glory. As though the Constitution is not what all of this, all the horror that we see around us, all of this is the manifestation of the basic code of the Constitution, which is a theological enshrinement of property rights. That is what the Constitution is, and that is what we are living in. We are living in the hell of private property rights as the only enshrined sacred relationship. Nothing else is real. Property is real. Property ownership is real. Everything is in the thrall of that. And all the things that conspiracy people point to as perversions of the constitutional order, from the establishment of the Federal Reserve to the assassination of John F. Kennedy, all the response to 9/11, all of that stuff is not a perversion of the constitutional order. It is the organic outgrowth, the organic response of this system to changing conditions, changing more people, is the big one. Just as the country gets bigger and the complexity of governing it increases, as the technological capacity of governance increases, these things sprout up. We need a Federal Reserve. The gold will not cut it anymore. Boom. We get one. We're going to be a globe-bestriding colossus and we're going to impose capitalism on the rest of the world? Well, then we can't depend on democratic, accountable institutions to carry that out. That is not efficient enough. Boom. We get a security state. All of these things exist. They emerge to reinforce and protect the central imperative of the constitutional order. And for me, the big problem I have with every stripe of conspiracy person and the populist concept in general is that almost always is embedded within it is a faith in the constitutional order as the bedrock of like real human liberty that has been perverted by bad actors. And if you think that, then your plan to defeat the bad actors will only end up reinforcing the very structures that allow them and in fact mandate them to do what they do. It's not corruption, though, is the thing. I think thinking about it as corruption implies there is something to corrupt. There was never anything to corrupt. All the stuff that we think of as the virtue stuff, it's ad copy. It was never actually enshrined in our institutions. It's animated people who worked within those institutions. They genuinely believed in it in different ways, but they were constrained in how they could express that belief by the institutional straitjacket of our political system. Like, it has to be revolutionarily uprooted. Or, failing that, superseded by others in other places, in other times, having other experiences, who are not enchanted the way we are. Canal. Howdy, folks. How's it going? So if anybody might remember this, a while ago, back when we had the office in New York, I had somebody sent us this set of Desert Storm trading cards. And we just emptied out the office and we mailed everything out here. And I got them. I was actually thinking like a week ago how fun and delightful the Desert Storm trading card set is and how much I wish I could open it, because there's a ton of these. We barely opened any of them. And boom, now I have them. I have them. I have like a whole thing of these. It's awesome. And it's such a wonderful, it's a wonderful time capsule of like the end of history. Like when American hegemony was first solidifying into like a enduring cultural reality that persisted until, I would say, what date would I put it on? When did we give up on American hegemony? Maybe when O'Bungler got elected? 2008? Crisis? Yeah. Iraq had already been sort of accepted as a failure by that point. And then you had the economic crash on top of that. Yeah, 2008. So we had like a live cultural assumption of end of history. I would argue an American hegemony, even after 9/11, because the War on Terror is an attempt to respond to the specific traumatic event of 9/11 by pushing post-Cold War American hegemony into the realm of military domination and outside of the realm of, economic control through the reserve currency and things like that, which, as we're now seeing, is vulnerable if you've got rising powers to deal with, which was going to be an inevitable response to result of the end of the communist bloc. But we were going to fight it. We were going to put our fucking feet down into the Middle East. We're going to put a boot up everyone's ass. And we were going to extend American territorial control over the most important strategic resource and the real backer of currency in the post-70s world economy, oil. Because we had a gold standard in the 19th century that transitioned eventually into an oil standard by the 70s. The petrodollar, they call it. But we were going to make the petrodollar the permanent feature of the global economy simply by parking America's military resources right where it came out. Which really doesn't... It has nothing to do with like a specific actor within the world oil market getting it. Like, that was the blood for oil thing that was facile, and that a lot of Matthew Iglesias type slugs like to make fun of. Oh, they think they're doing this for Chevron? Nah. No, of course not. It's a fungible resource. The question is, what are the political institutions that are going to exist where it gets pulled out of the ground? That actually matters. As we're seeing, like deciding where to, it's a fungible resource, but deciding who gets it at what price is still something that can be planned for, and is planned for by OPEC. An OPEC situation is different if the U.S. military backs directly your puppet regime through military occupation. But of course, that was, not the original idea. The George H.W. Bush idea that the Persian Gulf War was a set piece to present to the world, I think, was the best way to think about it, would not have America taking over in the Middle East. It would have America as the chief enforcer of a global economic order that benefited America, maintaining that system. And sure, the rising tide raising all boats, wink, wink, as they liberalize their economies, wink, wink. But the U.S. wouldn't have to stomp their army all over the place. But we soon found out, oh no, this thing's a lot more rickety than we thought it was. And America's centrality to the global capitalist economy was getting to the point where it was conflicting with the greater health of the organism. And when that happens, when you have a conflict between the self-interest of the national host organ for global capitalism and the world economic order, the world system, you get a removal of headquarters from one country to another, from the Netherlands to the UK to the United States. And we are at the point that the UK was in by the 20s, and that the Dutch were in by at least by the 1700s. Thank you for reminding me. So let's go back to the beginning of when this era all starts. I love a good periodization, and I would say that the most important dates of post-war America are 1947, which is the year, among other things, that the Taft-Hartley Act is signed and passed over the veto of President Truman. The other, 1980, the election of Ronald Reagan. And 1991, the fall of the Soviet Union, the Desert Storm, and then, of course, 2001. Then 2008. 2016. Now what you'll see is that they keep coming faster. Why is that? Because that's how you chart a crisis. That's how you chart the deepening of a fundamental crisis within a system. Oh, rapid, disruptive, traumatic events are happening faster and faster. Time wave. Thank you, Terence McKenna. So this thing began with dreams of a brave new world. Bush himself said it. He didn't care what people were going to think about it. It didn't occur to him probably that anyone could do that, because to him it was so self-evident that this new world was going to be best for America. Broadly understood, because that's the thing about guys like Bush, is they believe their own bullshit to a certain degree. Like, America's the best country, and if the people in America are having, in aggregate, the best time, then all is right with the world. And, he probably viewed the center of America as a bunch of farm animals, but he did think that American-led global imperium would be a good way for farm animals to live. It would be good conditions. They would be like Wagyu. But of course, people living on the other side of that experience, they heard Brave New World and they freaked out. And we had a whole culture around venerating this. We turned it into baseball cards. And what's so amazing about the Iraq War, the Gulf War, is that, and it does make you think about 9/11. It was not the Bush administration responding to events and being like, "Oh, cool, let's go with this." That does describe most events. It's not the U.S. doing something and precipitating something, and then through a plan, it's a thing happens and the U.S. puts it to their best advantage because they have the power to. But in the Iraq War case, you have a situation where the U.S. was in a position to interpose itself between Saddam and the Kuwaitis. They were in a position to draw a red line for Saddam diplomatically and even push him and the Kuwaitis towards some sort of deal. That deal could have involved, among other things, the Kuwaitis laying off on the money that Saddam owed them for oil, for loans that he had taken out during the Iran-Iraq War. Debt relief, some sort of profit sharing in disputed zones. It could have been worked out. Instead, what the U.S. did through its Iraqi ambassador, April Glaspie, is they went to Saddam and they said to him point blank in the face, "We have no interest in your dispute with the Kuwaitis. It is not an American priority. It is up to you to resolve." And then he resolved it by invading Kuwait. And then we decided we had our new globalist crusade. A classic bit of entrapment. Okay, so what did it get us? It got us this beautiful moment. Of course, what's amazing about it is that it didn't even get George H.W. Bush a second term. That's what's so stunning. And that does really remind you that the usefulness of propaganda as propaganda for narrow political purposes is pretty limited. If you can pull off the Iraq War, this monument to a monumental setup, and pull it off perfectly, and then because you have a 3-month economic downturn at the precise wrong moment, 18 months later, you're out on your ass for some hillbilly fucking carnival barker, some snake oil salesman shit kicker, some up-jumped fucking redneck to take your shit, some fucking hippie. That guy who was, it's like, oh yeah, Bill Clinton met JFK when he was a kid because he was such an exceptional young man. Bitch, I killed JFK. And then he's bounced on his ass. Oh, I do mean New World Order. I shouldn't have said Brave New World, sorry. But he got bounced on his fucking ass. But the system persisted because it's beyond any one figure, even a figure as strategically valuable as. And finally, we were talking about them earlier, but this is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, our partner, our biggest partner in the Middle East. More important, I'd say, than Israel in many ways. But now, very interestingly, starting to break off, starting to recognize that the American project at this point is now at odds with the greater flourishing of world capitalism. And that is honestly something that I find funny about the multipolarity people. Because people, they really have this article of faith that multipolarity means that socialism is going to be allowed to emerge in these countries. But multipolarity is the end drive of capitalism. It does not want, ultimately, to be headquartered in any one nation state. It wants to dissolve all of these things. It can't do it yet, but that's certainly the drive. And the American state project of trying to prevent this from happening, which really was initiated with 9/11. We were kind of floating there after the end of the Cold War, and then you had the Clintonian right to protect global watchman fantasy, but that was just unsustainable. The only thing that is going to prevent the eventual dethroning of the United States from as headquarters of global capitalism is a assertion of American military power, not diplomatic power or economic power, because economic power is going to keep moving away
decentering from the United States. And the war on terror is this last throw of the dice, similar to what Putin is doing in Ukraine, to secure America's position relative to globalizing capital. And that means that our clients are going to start over time having interests that become into greater and greater conflict with the America's interests. And that's what's happening with Saudi Arabia. And so now they're starting to smooch the Chinese. So, yeah, multipolarity, the great Satan dethroned. Good in many ways, but not something that's necessarily going to lead to an efflorescence of socialism. The real question is whether the declining powers that still have the ability to launch a nuke, like Russia and like the United States, are going to be able to be restrained from trying to hold on to their preeminence by any means necessary. That's the big question.